Shields up, Iron Breakers, and welcome to the best of 2017. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice and why I feel it is one of the best releases that we've had this year. Now, this is a game that manages to tackle a very sensitive subject matter while still crafting an interesting narrative around it with some solid gameplay to boot. If you were to ask me what exactly is the genre of Hellblade, to be completely honest, I don't really have an answer for you. I guess linear action, adventure, narrative-driven game, but it's something that hasn't really been done before. Sure, it is ultimately a linear story, but the way in which that story is told and the way that you interact with that world, and more importantly, the way that Senua's mind interacts with you, crafts what I consider to be a unique experience that can only really be experienced in the medium of video games. And that is something that I tend to value quite a bit, because it's fairly easy for a game to kind of for any game out there to just create a story that could potentially be told in a movie. It is not as easy to create a story that the way in which it is presented needs to be in a video game so that you can properly experience it. At least that's the way that I personally feel about Hellblade. Now, one of the first things that I want to touch up on is the visuals. Now, it has a very Norse, Viking era, Celtic era type of visual to it, which is intended because that is when the game takes place. It is during that period. And the visuals look pretty good. The animations also look pretty good, even though I do have to say at some point, the fact that the camera is so close to Senua's shoulders almost made it a little bit claustrophobic. But in a way, I feel that that might be the intent of the developer because of the subject matter, which I will get into a little bit further on. So, in terms of visuals, I felt it was pretty good. They did a good portrayal. And it's very interesting because they do something that not a lot of developers realize how to work on, because a lot of developers sometimes like to go for, oh, I'm gonna have this gritty art direction, I'm gonna have this game be super dark and it's gonna be amazing, people are gonna be scared. But it's interesting that when a video game goes too far along those lines, what tends to happen is, oh, it's so dark and gritty, that it basically, the players kind of become desensitized to how dark and gritty the world of that video game is. And I kind of feel that it would have been very easy for the developers of Hellblade to go down that path and make that mistake, but they didn't. So they will present you at times with a dark and gritty reality because that is just the story that they're trying to tell. However, they manage to interweave that with moments where the world seems happy. There's a sunset or a sunset or a sunrise. Sorry, my mind went blank there. There's a sunset or a sunrise, which manages to accentuate the different colors of the place that you are in. And it manages to portray a feeling of happiness, a feeling that makes you feel good, only to then, in greater contrast, manages to make you feel bad when you go back to the dark and gritty portions of the game. And that kind of experience is essential to the storytelling of Senua. And I felt they did a fantastic job in portraying the visuals that way. The animations during combat, the animations during cutscene, in my opinion, were top-notch as well. So in terms of visual fidelity and just how the game looked overall, I was very satisfied with Hellblade Senua Sacrifice. Now, another topic that I want to bring up is the sound. Now, the visuals were pretty good, but the sound of Hellblade is something out of this world. Like, I'm not even kidding you. If you play this video game, as a matter of fact, I played through the entire thing in one sitting, and I would not advise most people to do that, because the sound of Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice is it's so intense that a lot of times I was not feeling all that well because of how good the sound is able to immerse you into the game, that at certain points I was just like, geez, I think I'm getting a headache. I don't feel all that well. Because, again, this is because of how good the sound is, okay? Trust me, it's something that you have to experience for yourself while you are playing the game. The way that the voices in Senua's head, they kind of speak to you, and they use the 3D microphone to record positional audio and stuff like that, and the way that those voices come through and you hear them from different directions, and you know, basically Senua's insanity, because she has mental illness. She suffers from psychosis, and the way that they managed to portray that in game is nothing short of mind-blowing. I was really blown away by the sound design, is what I'm saying. So anyway, that's one of the main reasons why I liked it. So in terms of gameplay itself, what does the gameplay consist of? Well, you are roaming through this location that you're going to. I'm not going to be telling you any details at all about the story, because I feel that that is something that should be experienced by the players themselves. I'm not even going to tell you the background of the story, because I feel that I might spoil the experience for someone. So the story itself, you'll just have to take my word for it that I personally enjoyed the story, so that's worth what it is worth. But the gameplay itself consists of some light puzzle solving mixed with some action sequences. Now, the combat is fairly simplistic. I mean, you have a block, a light attack, a heavy attack, and a melee attack. The melee attack is essentially like, in Dark Souls terms, it's like a kick. So it's used mostly when your opponent is able to block or something like that. You will use a kick to stop him from blocking, and then you will punish with heavy attacks or whatever. Now, there is an interesting mechanic in that combat as well that I feel is not particularly well explained, but it reminded me a little bit of Assassin's Creed 2 when I played it, because that's one of the last Assassin's Creed that I personally played. But it had this thing where you could go into a high profile mode or a regular mode. Now, regular mode, it would be for you to kill stuff in stealth, so it's fairly easy moves that you can make for, you know, easy combos. And then high profile mode would be something where you would do more spectacular moves. And that's kind of what I feel that they're going for with the combat here, because there's a modifier button essentially, which is your running button, that will allow you to perform more high impact moves. And I kind of feel the game didn't really explain that all that well. But it's just like, it adds additional layer to the combat, which, even though it's pretty simple, the fact that you can do, you know, a light attack or a high profile light attack kind of adds a lot more into the variety of the way that you do combat. So even though it might seem simple at the start, as you get into the combat a little bit more, you'll begin to understand it's not as simple. Also, you can block, and using blocks you can parry, you can dodge, you can do a lot of cool stuff while you're doing combat, and the animation on there is on point. So even though the combat is fairly simple, it still manages to keep you engaged, and it does, how should I put this? It makes good use of all of its abilities throughout the matches that you are faced into combat. Now, on top of that, they also do something that I find, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, the puzzle solving that I mentioned. There's puzzle solving, there's combat. The puzzle solving is usually all about perspective. So they will give you like a rune, and you will have to look around the world to figure out, you know, what certain objects could kind of form that rune. Like, you might see two trees and two cross trees in between, and that would form like a special rune, and you have to look at it from a certain perspective in order to solve the puzzle. There's that. There's also other things that involve perspective, like distortion of reality, and it's very interesting because the puzzle solving is ultimately integrated into the story and the narrative, because this is a character who sees the world in different ways because she suffers from psychosis. So she sees patterns, and she sees all of these things throughout the world. So in a way, essentially, this is Senua manipulating her reality through her mind, which I might have even given away too much there, but I don't want to get too much more into it. Let's just say that the puzzle solving is deeply integrated with the narrative, and it actually makes sense. It's not just like those games that sometimes put a puzzle in there just for the sake of putting a puzzle in there. The puzzles are actually integrated into the way that they tell the story and are a full, an integral part of the whole experience. So good gameplay, in my opinion, good puzzle solving, even though I do have to say there are a couple of occasions in the game that I felt it had a little bit of a pacing issue, where it gave you maybe too much puzzles and not enough action, but that is because I'm a very much action-driven player. So there were times in the game where I felt the pacing is a little bit off here. Like, I wish there was maybe a little bit of combat to in between these puzzles to kind of sort things out. But ultimately, I never really felt like, oh my god, this is so boring. I can't play this anymore. You know, that's what I'm getting at. And an interesting thing that they've also done is where you go to select your difficulty, you have your easy, your normal, and your hard, and then you have something which is called auto difficulty. And this is something that is particularly interesting to me because a lot of the times nowadays when video games come out, it's like a lot of the times I don't know which difficulty I will want to play in because several games believe that normal is something that everyone should be able to achieve. Other games believe that easy is the way to go, and it's kind of hard because as gaming has gone more mainstream, it has become harder for certain gamers to figure out which difficulty they should be playing games in. That happens to be the case with me. So I tried auto difficulty and I felt like it was very well balanced because essentially what happened was as I started, it felt pretty easy because it was the first couple of combats super easy. So I instantly started parrying enemies, killing enemies super fast. And then I noticed that it was evolving. It was like, no, now we're gonna make it a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And by the time I got to the end, if you guys were watching, because I did a full live stream of this, if you guys were watching the live stream, you noticed that I was starting to get frustrated. I was like, God damn it, look at all these goddamn enemies. I have no room to move. And basically it started increasing the difficulty to the point where it was becoming really challenging. And you see, that is something I feel more games should experiment with, the auto difficulty option there. At least in my opinion, I felt that it was good because, again, it started easy and it became challenging as I continued playing through the game, and it finished as the most challenging thing, at least. I don't know if it was on hard or if it was on normal. I don't know how hard it was by the time I finished the game, but it felt pretty damn challenging every time I was involved in combat. So that was good. Now, one of the things that this game does, for those of you that aren't aware, I just said a little bit earlier, the game portrays a character that suffers from psychosis. So basically this game does a portrayal of mental illness. And this is a subject that is somewhat of a taboo. Not a lot of people like to tackle mental illness because they don't want to be disrespectful. So I think that what Ninja Theory has done here, because they've done extensive research, like I watched the feature thing where they were talking about all the people that they worked with to better understand how it works for people that actually hear voices in their heads, and they had these people actually work together with them to try and make the experience as authentic as it could possibly be. And it is a portrayal of a deeply disturbed character, and the narrative works so well in crafting how that all fits together that I was amazed. And I think it is something that is innovating, and it is bringing something to the table that a lot of games need to take notice of. Because again, like I said at the start of this video, it's very easy for video games to tell a story. It's not always easy for video games to use the medium of interactive storytelling to tell a story that can only be told through a video game. And in my opinion, that is exactly what they did here. And good on them for doing all of this research and talking with all of these experts in their respective fields about the psychosis and and schizophrenia and other types of mental illnesses, so that now people can kind of experience what it is like for someone who suffers from these conditions, at least to a certain extent. And I find that to be respectable and laudable, and it is definitely one of the reasons why I want to include this game in my list. And finally, the final reason that this game is definitely one of the best in 2017. As you guys may or may not know, one of the things that I consider a big deal when selecting my best games of a specific year is how much they innovate the industry, how much they move things forward. And something that this team has done here I find to be pretty much mind-blowing, because essentially this is a team that has half the size of your typical AAA developers, and they decided we're going to be doing a game with this team that is half the size of a AAA developer, and we're going to be basically charging half the price for it. So this was a very we're not shooting for AAA. We are shooting for something else, and we want to tell this story. We want to craft this experience. It's a single player only game. We don't have any kinds of loot boxes or anything, in the game that requires you to invest the required amount of time or something like that. There's no grind. There's just a single player story in its purest form. And this game released at $30. $30 or 30 euros in Europe, which, let's not get into the whole 1-to-1 ratio Let's just accept 30 euros, $30, or 25 pounds, or however much it was in the UK. And in doing so, they managed to make their game profitable within 3 months with 500,000 copies sold. See, this is exactly one of the things that I've been talking about in my videos of proper budgeting. Budget according to what you can do. Don't like have several $1 million budgets and then not be able to actually, fulfill unless you sell like a ridiculous amount of copies. This game became profitable at 500,000 copies sold. And it deserves a lot more if you ask me, because it's a great experience. It's a fair price for a video game. And you guys might be wondering, okay, so how long did it actually take you to finish the game? It's actually around 7 hours, at least for me. And I didn't even go too far off the beaten path to look for additional runes and other things that I could have found in the game. Around 7 hours. So it's like, to me, this is a very respectable thing that they've done here. And they've shown other developers, look, there is most definitely room for single player experiences. There is most definitely room for doing it and still be profitable. And I applaud them for that, for having a very straight up, successful business strategy that doesn't take advantage of the consumer. Anyway, that's all I really had to say about Hellblade. What do you guys think about Hellblade? If you've played it, or are you considering playing it, just let me know in the comment section below. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.